Maybe some of you have seen the chart of the performance that we have had, and there are two things I'll say about that. One is the performance is very good, but the other is very volatile. And therefore, that's another reason why, please, do your own due diligence and be very careful on making sure you do that. What you have seen in the history of the price of silver for literally several decades is a strong effort by a number of mostly American and English banks, such as JP Morgan or such as the Federal Reserve, to suppress the price of silver. And the way they've done it, as I mentioned before, is they use primarily the two exchanges in the West, one in London, the London Metal Exchange, and the other in the United States. We're talking about COMEX, where they're, in my opinion, working in cahoots to keep the price of silver suppressed. And what's particularly ironic about that is they've had huge help from the government of China, which is wanting to keep silver suppressed so they can buy as much of it as they possibly can, somewhat similar to their situation with gold. And as a result, China has enormous reserves of silver as well as gold, which from a currency standpoint, on balance, I think a negative and a significant one for the United States. As how they would do this would be that COMEX in particular, the exchange, makes it very difficult, essentially impossible for the most part, if you are long silver futures, you're not buying silver physically, talk about COMEX, you're buying a future, it's a commodity, is that if you had a move way up in silver and people are saying, gee, we actually want to get the silver rather than just stick with the future, the COMEX has had the ability to block that. And they're continuing to do that blockage ability very recently in terms of saying to people who have a silver future on COMEX that they don't want to keep, they want to get delivery of the actual silver. COMEX has had the ability to say, no, we're not going to give you actual silver. Instead, we're going to give you cash for the gain that you have in the silver future. However, that ability has been weakening as part of a number of the changes in both the silver and gold. And now it becomes more difficult for COMEX, I believe, to not deliver either silver or gold if the buyers who have the futures are foreign major institutions such as central banks and so on and so forth. And so they've tried this long-term record of saying, okay, we're going to sell mostly when the new markets open for silver in COMEX in the afternoon. They will use the fact that there's light volume of trading and pump out some major sell blocks that can push the price of silver down. And the reason that has worked until recently is these banks are in cahoots with the traders of silver futures that they are close to, and they get often, the rumor is, they'll get advanced information. Say if the Federal Reserve is going to make some statement about money supply and so on and so forth, they may get an advance on that and use that to encourage the dealers to short on top of what they are doing, push the price down 10 or 15%, and at the same time then out comes this statement from one of the U.S. institutions, the Fed or the Treasury or something, that causes people to sell even more. And at that point, they will start buying and go from there. I think they had a little bit like that just in the last few days, because when silver got up to new highs, for example, in Shanghai, silver selling at a premium to what it is on the silver futures market of COMEX, it got to over $80. And then COMEX announced two things, this just in the last couple of days. They said, well, we're going to increase, I think by about 13%, the margin that you have to hold on to silver. And then on top of that, they said we're going to cut the size of the long positions in silver futures that we allow people to have on the COMEX. And it reminds me a little bit of how they, I guess I'll use the word shafted the Hunt brothers 45 years ago when the Hunts were trying to corner the market for silver and had really done so until the COMEX changed the rules and caused a collapse in the price of silver through, again, changing the rules on how much silver futures people could hold on the COMEX. They may, as far as I know, I don't remember, have reduced the size of positions, all of which caused a dramatic collapse 45 years ago. Well, we had a pretty dramatic collapse earlier this week, at least about a 10% collapse from close to 80 down to 70 or close to 70. My attitude toward this is we've seen all this stuff. It's not going to have any long-term effect. I don't know if they were trying to get silver to have a lower price as they've done in the past, but my reaction as I look at it is pretty meaningless longer term. Already, the silver price on the COMEX has picked back up dramatically. I wouldn't surprise if we see new highs in silver on COMEX. So if anybody is saying, gee, maybe this means I should be concerned about holding silver or our favorite silver mining companies, I would say ignore that. We think the price of silver and the silver miners have much new highs to get to.
If you want a copy of my book, The Speculator's Mosaic, you can find that on Amazon.